First and most importantly, you can't judge me for not owning a Batman t-shirt, all right? I always wear comic shirts in this, and I didn't have a Batman t-shirt. I'll get there eventually. I'm sure there will be a cool design that I'll find eventually, but I didn't have one, okay? So we're just rocking the Free Comic Book Day hat. And I know I'm not normally a hat guy either, so it's just basically, it's a wardrobe disaster today. You know him as the Dark Knight, the Caped Crusader, Bruce Wayne, any of his other nicknames and aliases, but we are talking, of course, about Batman today. See, I feel like for a lot of people that are getting into comics in the last few years, Batman is one of those characters that seems easy to get into. You can kind of just pick up a lot of Batman stories and read them, but there's also like a lot of them. There's a ton of stuff. There's a ton of Batman stuff from all over the years that has a different flavor to it. So while I do think you can kind of read any Batman run and generally it's gonna like be pretty good, except Nightfall. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. I don't think you should start there. I will give you the rundown of what I think the best like Batman jumping off points are, and let's keep it easy. I'm gonna start with something that people have read and talked about for years at this point, and it's highly regarded and it's considered one of the best Batman runs, and that's because it's really great and I highly recommend it. It is the Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo Batman run. So this is volume 1. It goes on for like 8 volumes of the trade paperbacks, and you can get the omnibus and all the different ways to read it. I would say if you're going to read this run, you can just start from the beginning. It's fantastic from the beginning. If you know enough about Batman to know like who his standard rogues gallery is, it's like, oh, the Joker and the Penguin and, the other villains that Batman faces. You'll get a lot out of this because it's a refreshing and interesting thing without relying on a lot of those old characters. And also, if you don't know a ton about Batman, I think this is a good jumping off point. I actually do think you can start with Court of Owls and like get a great reading experience, even if you're not versed in the world of Batman. Although I guess the warning I should give you is that if you start here, if you start with Court of Owls, you might end up disappointed when you read more Batman and it's not as good as this. Scott Snyder is one of my all-time favorite writers and somebody whose run on Batman is considered one of the best. And Greg Capullo, I mean, I'll never stop talking about Greg Capullo. I think he's incredibly talented and his art style is so distinctive and so vibrant, and it just has a quality to it that lends itself really well to a character like Batman that operates at the street level. If you're interested in reading the Snyder and Capullo run, but you'd like to jump a little bit around in the run, I'm not really sure why you would do that, but you can if you want to. I'm not going to judge you. You can jump in 0 Year, which is a little bit later in the run, and that gives us like the earliest stories of Batman's career. So it tells stuff that happens right when he becomes Batman. It retells his origin story. It gives you a chance to jump in chronologically at the beginning of Batman's story, even though the rest of Snyder and Capullo's run does not take place chronologically at the beginning. They're telling modern Batman stories. They jump back and they tell us a story that happened really early in the run. A little bit of a kind of a humble brag here. When I met Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, I got them to sign this issue from 0 Year, and then Danny Mickey as well is on this issue, and he signed that, and that's the inker who worked with them on this book. So very, very cool run. I think 0 Year is a fantastic retelling of Batman's origin. It does a lot of justice to the character and like his early years operating in Gotham, and starting either with Court of Owls at the beginning of the Snyder Capullo run or jumping ahead and reading 0 Year, I think is both a worthwhile way to get into Batman. Before we get into the next book here, I thought it'd be a fun little aside to show you guys something that as a comic book collector and an action figure collector has been an important part of my collecting journey since I was a kid. And that's that when I was younger, I got this action figure of Batman. This is from like 2004 or 5, I believe. It's been tough. I haven't done extensive Googling, so I haven't been able to find exactly what series this is from, but this was given to me by a family member for like my birthday or Christmas one year, and I love this figure. It used to have a lot more accessories, which I have since lost, but I like this Batman figure, and it's really, really damaged over the years. I mean, the horns on his mask are all but gone, and it's just not in the shape that it was when I was a kid. But it was the only Batman action figure I had up until about a year ago. And then a year ago, I got something in a 2-pack with, over here you see my Spawn action figures. And in the Spawn Batman 2-pack, I finally upgraded my Batman action figure and got this. This is the McFarlane Toys Spawn Batman 2-pack Batman action figure. I love this thing. I love the black suit. I love the yellow logo and belt. I think the cowl is very cool. His face is, it's a little bit intimidating. He's really, really scowling there. Which I think is a funny feature of this thing. It came with some batarangs and like a stand for it to go on a shelf. And the cape is cool. I dig the cape a lot. To me, the only other Batman figure I've ever really been interested in would be like a statue of Batman 423, but that's, the one they make of that is expensive and not that high quality from what I understand. So this to me is like kind of the dream Batman action figure. Like I said, the cape looks sick. It's got these like horns on the edges of the cape, which I think is really cool. Just adds some texture to the figure and just makes it feel really pointy. To me, the best Batman is always like a very stylized Batman, a character that doesn't feel like a guy in a suit, but feels like some sort of phantom and like figment of the imagination of the people of Gotham and something mysterious. And so having it be all black, I think, is just a cool way to represent that costume and to have an intimidating big cape and everything like that. Okay, so for the second book, this is one that, like, if you clicked on this video, you knew I was going to talk about it, so I won't spend a ton of time on it because I don't want to waste your time. But of course, it's the one and only Frank Miller, The Dark Knight Returns. This is the trade paperback printed a couple years ago. This is not like an old copy, but I've read it many, many times. And The Dark Knight Returns is as good as people say it is, right? So if you are a Frank Miller fan, you're going to love this. If you are a Batman fan, you're going to love this. If you are both, like me, of course you're going to love it. You're going to think it's incredible. And it is really incredible. It's something that sets the tone, I think, for the way that Batman stories happened after it was published. So prior to The Dark Knight Returns, you still had this thing about Batman that, like, he wasn't an inherently comical character, but he wasn't always a character that was incredibly serious. People were much more willing to push the kind of fantastical, silly nature of the fact that his villains and things were oftentimes just people in costumes. And so Dark Knight Returns took a way to take a character and like make them more mature, and really ran with that and really allowed us to get a different side of Batman that we hadn't seen before, and I think we've seen a lot since. And Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run is a great example of this, of course, but I think that the Dark Knight Returns just gives you a new perspective on Batman as a character. Another aspect of the Dark Knight Returns that I don't think gets talked about enough, or at least as much as I would like it to be discussed in comic book collecting, is that it gives us a version of Superman that is really unique and interesting and cool. This is, for me personally, my favorite physical rendition of Superman. This is my favorite way he's ever been drawn. And that's why my favorite cover from this run is The Dark Knight Falls. This cover with the silhouettes of Superman and Batman fighting each other. I think that Superman physique is like so interesting and unique, and just like, I don't know, the way that this is put together, the way it's presented to me is like the ideal Superman. I like how he looks. I like the story in this. It's really interesting and compelling. If you like the concepts introduced in something like the Justice League movie or Batman v Superman, where like Superman has to be, you know, taken down by Batman or the Justice League or whatever, I'm like, this is what you read. You don't need to try to go find all the other evil Superman stuff. I think this and Batman Hush, which we'll talk about in a bit here, are kind of the best way to get exposure to that story, the evil Superman trope and the, you know, Batman fights Superman. That's great. You don't need to read Injustice. You can read Hush and you can read Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, and you'll get a great experience with evil Superman. But regardless, you will get a great experience with Batman. I think The Dark Knight Returns is a great way to start. You get so much knowledge about who Batman is as a person, as a character. We get a new Robin in this, which is a lot of fun. There's just a lot of interesting, fun stuff that happens in the story, and I highly recommend it. I think it's fantastic. I needed to throw a curveball in there because I know I have fans of mine and people in my comments and stuff who can get, you know, they can get a little stuck up about new stuff versus old stuff. You always want to read the classics. You always want to recommend those. And with this, this is something that I personally have seen a lot of discourse online decrying it, saying it's not worth reading, it's not as amazing as I think it is, and I won't stand for that. I've decided to make my opinion publicly known on this, which is, of course, the wonderful and brilliant The Batman Who Laughs by Scott Snyder and Jock. I think this is incredible. I think this is fantastic writing. I think the concept is compelling. I think they pay off the concept in a compelling way. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. I like this as much as the mainline run on Batman, Snyder Capullo, Court of Owls. I like all of that, the same as Batman Who Laughs. And then Jock is the artist. And for me, one of my favorite artists is Stuart Sager. I've talked about him in this channel. I've met him a handful of times. We've like had extended, you know, artistic conversation. Jock does a lot of things in his artwork that Stuart Sager does. They are very similar artists. They're in that same vein, and it is so beautiful and captivating and interesting. And to be able to read a book that's with, you know, arguably the biggest superhero that DC has, one of the biggest 5, you know, or 3 superheroes ever in Batman, and it be this like very cool, very interesting art style that's like experimental. It's, you know, it's not unrecognizable. It's not really bizarre, but it is like very cool stuff. It doesn't feel like anything else that's being done in mainstream comics all the time. It feels very vibrant and very dynamic and so much movement to it. It's good. And the story is good. You will be interested and you'll be on the edge of your seat and you'll wonder what's going to happen, and it will keep happening. And it's cool. I like The Batman Who Laughs a lot. If you don't like it, I guess, you know, you're entitled to your opinion. I would not begrudge that of you. I don't want you to think that I'm diminishing you, but I might be judging you a little bit, and I guess I'm not too ashamed to say that. I think Batman Who Laughs is great. I think Scott Snyder is great, and basically anytime he picks up the pen, you know you're gonna get at least an excellent story, if not an all-time classic. And in this case, I think it's a really, really good Batman story. I guess maybe don't make it the very first thing you read, but don't push it to the back of your reading list with Batman. Like, if you've read one other Batman thing, read this, because it's interesting and fun, and you get some weird, cool stuff that happens. Batman Elseworlds is an entire genre within DC. They've gone so far as to do a compendium of Batman Elseworlds stories, and my favorite of these is something called Batman Holy Terror. This retells Batman's story through the lens of like a Catholic church setting, that he's a priest and he's also dressing up as his Bat character. And it has an almost V for Vendetta aspect to it. There's a lot of kind of working inside the institution to do some sort of ethical, unethical, I don't want to use the T word, but doing some things to dismantle the system from the inside. And it's very, very short. So if you want to read this, it's like one sitting. It's basically the size of like a single comic book. So it's very, very easy to read. And I think what it does is reminds us that a character like Batman, who has interesting motivations and different reasons for the way that he operates, that concept can be abstracted, can be taken out of the lens of Gotham City in the modern 21st century and turned into a story set in a totally different world, but using that same like central theme of who the character is, and that he's noble and he wants the right thing and he wants to do what's right, even if it's very difficult and he has to do it in an unconventional way, and retell it. And it gives you a reason to like latch onto something there. And I think it's really great. I think Holy Terror is cool. It's moody, it's interesting, it's dark. Like I like the style of it. I like the writing. I think it's really great. And I love the way that Norman Brayfogle draws Batman. I've always thought that. So this is a cool Elseworld story that, yeah, I recommend. I think it's great. Off the top of my head, I can't think of another character that has had two of their most gigantic, influential storylines ever created, done by the same creative person in both instances, other than Batman with Frank Miller. And so we're going to talk about two stories of Batman here, because I think they go well together. But first, of course, we'll talk about Frank Miller's Batman Year One. Batman Year One is as monumental a work as any Batman book can be. This is, in a way, like a book that established a pre- and post-history for Batman. You have Batman stories before Batman Year One and Batman stories after. And Frank Miller, when he was at the top of his game, was obviously producing some of the highest caliber work in comic books. It could easily be argued that Frank Miller has fallen off within the last couple of years, but I've talked about that in other videos, and I don't really have any interest in treading that ground over and over, because I hold him in such high regard that even if in his older age he's not operating at the same caliber, I don't think it matters, because he has such a monumentally good body of work. In the case of Batman Year One, like I said, this has established a pre- and post-history, so there's Batman comics and broadly superhero comics before and after this book. It's extremely influential, and with good reason, in the way that Watchmen is held in such high regard and is objectively what it is claimed to be. I think this book is as well. You're going to get exactly what you think you're going to get. You're going to get an excellent Batman story. It's going to give you some insight into his origin story and his beginnings as Batman operating in Gotham, and it's going to have fantastic art the entire time. I mean, it's beautiful to read. On the flip side of that, we have to talk about a book that came out after that, and that's Batman Year Two. This is a trade paperback of this, which you don't see often. I don't think they've printed this a ton of times, but I like this cover a lot, and then you get another cover on the back with the villain from this series, Batman Year Two. So this is jumping, of course, a year into the future of Batman's career, and giving us a story of him kind of a little bit more established, and just kind of telling us more about how he got his footing as the Caped Crusader. For me, the story in this did not really land, obviously, the way that the first one did. The first one is so groundbreaking, and it's so well put together as a detective story. You see a lot of influence from Batman Year One in Matt Reeves' movie The Batman, and you just don't see that kind of influence from Batman Year Two, because it's not, from a story perspective, something that's altogether that compelling. There are definitely some interesting things done with the character. I think that the willingness to negotiate some of the events around the death of Batman's parents definitely gives us something to think about in the way that Batman relates to his own city and the criminals around him. But generally, the reason I like this book is actually for a totally different reason, and that's the art. One of my all-time favorite Batman covers is from this run. It's Detective Comics number 578 with cover art by Todd McFarlane. I love this cover. I think it's really fantastic. I'm so proud to have it in my collection. And this is such an interesting and cool cover because of Todd's work with Batman specifically among all DC characters. Todd McFarlane has not done a lot of work with DC over the course of his career. Actually, the majority of that would be the Batman Spawn crossovers. That would be a larger percentage than basically anything else he's done. So Batman is the only DC character Todd has ever really touched. I'm aware of his work work on Infinity Inc., I have those issues. But in terms of like big name DC stuff, Batman is the place where Todd has excelled. Of course, you have the big covers like Batman 423, but I think in this case, you have an interesting example of where Todd was in his career at the time that he was drawing Batman. So as companion pieces, for the sake of beautiful art, Batman Year 1 and Batman Year 2 are worth reading together. Just know that after Year 1, you're not going to get the same kind of very interesting writing that Frank Miller is so good at in Year 2, because he wasn't involved in it at all. Also, a very mini way that Year 1 is extremely influential is because the Year 1 moniker has been used in a ton of other places in comics publishing, including at the Marvel side. This might be an unconventional pick when it comes to Batman, and I mentioned this book earlier in this video, but I do think as a Batman fan, this is something that it is important to read, if only to understand his role in the broader DC universe, because when we talk about Elseworld stories for Batman specifically, oftentimes those are tales only about Batman that are kind of off to one side, and I think that if you understand him as part of a team and part of like a broader pantheon of characters, it's important. It helps you elevate your experience reading the character. And so with that said, I mean, what better team story and something that is a gigantic epic in DC than Kingdom Come? Oftentimes when people talk about Kingdom Come, they quickly jump to the fact that this is a Superman-focused book, and that's true. This is a book primarily about Superman. Like, he's all over this book, and it's primarily a story about him kind of bringing justice to the world and being the good guy and all that stuff. But the characterization of Bruce Wayne in this is really fantastic. It's really good. And because the story primarily focuses on Superman, who is functionally immortal in the story, I mean, obviously, yeah, he's a little bit older, but he's not like ancient the way that he should be. The humanity of Bruce Wayne is really brought to the forefront here. You're reminded throughout Kingdom Come that Bruce Wayne is just a guy in a suit. He's frail, he's old, he's incapable of doing the same things he did when he was much younger, and yet here he is still trying to do the right thing and make things happen. And it takes some very interesting twists and turns in ways that are unexpected, so I highly recommend it as a Batman reader that you get Kingdom Come, that you read it, because it will help you establish kind of his role in the larger universe. Getting into the next book, I've kind of publicly talked about how Geoff Johns is one of my least favorite comic book writers. The primary reason for that being Doomsday Clock. I think it's just unreadable schlock garbage that I don't like at all. But I will say there are two things from Geoff Johns that I do really enjoy. One of them is Flashpoint. I think that book kind of speaks for itself. The fact that when adapted to a movie, the movie sucked, and yet you can still read the book and get so much out of it, even though a lot of it is like the same plot points, I think is a testament to how good Flashpoint is. It's a very good story. It's well done. I like the plot of that. I like the art. I think it's great. Secondly, Geoff Johns wrote a Batman story that was, I don't think, widely incredibly well received, but I liked it. I thought it was a good way to work with the characters in Batman's Rogues Gallery and give an interesting new angle and give you something to think about, because I think that oftentimes what happens is you set up a Batman story with something like, hey, you know, the Penguin is doing this evil criminal act, so what is Batman going to do about it? And the story is then just Batman figuring out how to get around the problem and fix the problem, and then it's all over, and it's over. With this book, I felt like there actually was something new going on. There actually was something interesting where I was like looking to see if there would be a different outcome. And obviously, yes, Batman wins in the end, just like any superhero story, but there's something cool and interesting at the beginning and the premise and the way that it's pitched that I think makes it worth reading the whole thing. This is Batman 3 Jokers. If the Joker had all along actually been three separate men operating as the Joker, what would that mean for Batman? What would that mean for him trying to stop the Joker? I think this is cool. I think it's worth reading, and it's a quick read. It's pretty thin, and I had a lot of fun with it. I thought that it was something that, like, it compelled me to read the whole thing, even if I don't think that maybe it's the most, like, incredible, fantastical thing of all time. It's like, it's worth reading. You can check it out. You'll have a good time with it. And, you know, whatever. When people talk about what stories about the Joker are their favorite, I often talk about this because I think that, like, it's the first time for a long time, I think, that a Joker story made me say, oh, wow, okay, what could they do with that concept? Like, that feels interesting. Rather than just kind of being like, and now the Joker's going to do another crime and Batman's going to stop it. It's like, what if there was a fundamental change to the way that the Joker was approaching comics? One of the things that's interesting, I think, in making a good Batman run, and you see this with the Court of Owls, with Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, is that a lot of times the best way to make a good Batman run is to do, and this sounds hacky, this sounds cliche, but is to do something that has never been done before. And I don't mean to say, like, set up a new mystery for Batman that's harder for him to solve than any mystery he's had to solve before. I'm talking about like do something fundamental to the character, like change something, and then either justify that change and show us how and why that change occurred, or tell a very interesting story that gets us back to the status quo and resolves that thing and makes you realize that maybe that change was actually not permanent or was not true. It was a deception, but I believed it while I was hearing the story. The next book that we're going to talk about, I'm going to draw a comparison to a Marvel book because I think there's an apt comparison to be made, and I won't get into heavy spoilers because I do want you to read it, but I think there's a really good comparison to be made with this book in terms of another extremely influential and pretty groundbreaking Marvel comic book. Ed Brubaker wrote The Winter Soldier for Marvel, and in reading that book, you know, if you know the plot of that book, that it changed fundamentally who Captain America's character was because it changed something from his past and brought that back to his present. And it gave us as the reader a reason to believe that new things could happen with Captain America even this many years into his publication history, which at this point is closer to 100 years than not, which is just insane. I'm talking about Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee's Batman Hush. Batman Hush is really good. There's a lot of rumors floating around right now that they're taking elements of this to use in Matt Reeves' The Batman 2. They may be doing Court of Owls. They may be doing a number of things, but this book lives up to the hype. This is as good as people say it is, which is great. Jim Lee, obviously, just a fantastic artist. I had the opportunity to meet Jim at New York Comic Con last year, and he was so kind and generous. And I asked him a little bit about Hush because I was just curious about that process and what it was like to work on such a book that has gone on to such big heights. And he talked about how great an experience it was and how proud he is of this work. And you can tell, I mean, you can see in the book how dedicated they were to telling a really good Batman story. And if you've read Batman Hush already, then good for you. And you know why I'm making the comparison to Winter Soldier, because this book takes the chance to do what I just said a minute ago and fundamentally change something about the Batman character. You have stories that take place before Hush, and there's something core and central to Batman that is just not the case anymore. There are new pieces of information, new aspects to the world around him and to Gotham City that are important and I think have changed the trajectory of his character after this event. This one might seem a little bit silly, but just stick with me when I say it's really, really worth reading. Within the next couple weeks here, I'd love to do a video talking about this other set of characters that this is a crossover with because they're some of my favorites. There's some characters that I've been reading and watching and listening to stuff of for most of my life. But Batman and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, published by DC, it's a great book. It's a very fun read. It's a good story. It's well put together. And that, I think, is primarily due to the author. If you're familiar with James Tynion, you know that his work just stands in this category, this other league. I mean, World Tree is incredible, and Something is Killing the Children is incredible. This is incredible. He picked up Scott Snyder's Batman run after Snyder left the book and carried that momentum onwards. So yeah, there's a couple volumes of this. It's good, it's fun, it's interesting, and the art is really sick. So I say check it out. Let's round it out. Let's shut it down. Let's talk about the last book I'm going to recommend, and I'm going to put some honorable mentions in the end of this video in the description and stuff like that I didn't get to or that I don't have a copy on hand of because I read it a long time ago from the library or something. But I think this is one of the best Batman stories ever told, especially because it has a fan interaction element to it. The fact that this was so influential, it changed comics publishing and the way that characters were handled by DC. It is Batman, A Death in the Family. You guys know I'm a huge Jim Starlin fan. I think he's an excellent writer. I like all of his work with Adam Warlock. I like all of his work with the Silver Surfer and Cosmic Marvel stuff. And I love his work on Batman. And there is no better example of that than Batman, A Death in the Family. Because this is the book where Robin dies. And that's not even a spoiler because look at the cover of the book. The cover of the book is it happening? You're meant to know. That's what you're reading when you get into this. There have obviously been so many Robins over the course of Batman's career, but this is the book where Robin dies. And the reason this happened historically, so interesting, so fascinating, I recommend you go on Wikipedia and read about it. I don't want to give you the whole lowdown here. It's fun to go down that rabbit hole and see how it happened. But know that fans decided Robin should die. And so I think that makes the story really interesting because Jim Starlin is somebody who has fundamentally changed the course of comics publishing multiple times with The Death of Captain Marvel and with Dreadstar being an independent comic book and with this book being the first time that someone in Batman's life had fully just died and not risen from the dead immediately. Starlin is really influential. He also wrote the issue of Batman that Todd McFarlane drew the most iconic cover of his career on. So Starlin just has this very interesting relationship to the character of Batman that I think is so worth exploring. And A Death in the Family is the way to go for that because it was so influential and so cool. If you think that there's something I'm missing, then please leave it in the comments. I want to know that stuff because if I haven't read it, maybe I will. And if I have read it, maybe I don't agree with you. Maybe I didn't put it in this list because I didn't think it was worth reading. But this is the stuff that I think is worth reading and is a good entry point for Batman and is cool and interesting and fascinating. So, like I said, argue with me if you want. and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.